Hello and welcome to another episode of The Poetic Turn. We talk about poets and poetry, and we're very excited today. Evan, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, that would be a terrific thing to do. This is a teacher, mentor, professor, friend of mine, Professor Dr. Mike Theune.
That's
Gotta
spelled
give him
T-H-E-U-N-E. T-H-E-U-N-E.
Yes, indeed. But you can call him Mike if you're listening to this podcast.
Get in front of the mic, Mike. No, we're very excited because this podcast is called The Poetic Turn, and the reason it's called The Poetic Turn is because of the influence of Mike Theune.
Yes, he wrote and edited a great book called Structure and Surprise that really digs into this thing, the poetic turn. He introduced it to me in college. It changed how I saw poetry and wrote poetry and other things, honestly. And yeah, he's terrific. So
and he passed that on to me, and I'm seeing the poetic turn now like I never did before. I'm enjoying poetry, of course, more now than I ever have before. And so, Mike, welcome.
What a pleasure it is to be with you two today. What a treat to get to see you again, Evan, and to get to meet and chat with you, Darren. It's my great pleasure. Thank you. I love, if it's okay, I should follow your lead, but I want to jump in on something a little bit, Darren. Like I love that you kind of say that once you've been directed to the turn, you kind of start seeing it everywhere. Yes. A book project that I'm long overdue on. I feel very bad about it, but it's in process. I'm working on a book that is called, that the subtitle of which is Realizing the Poetic Turn in Contemporary Poetry. And my point with the turn is not that the turn is totally unrealized, it's just that it's considerably under-realized. And poets deploy turns all the time, critics point to turns when they talk about poems all the time, but there's a way in which discussion of the turn just hasn't kind of bubbled up. I almost think about it as like in Star Trek, the teleporters, right, where like the turn is still kind of shimmering there, like somebody needs to make it to show that it's truly a real thing. And that's kind of my new effort. I think Structure and Surprise was an initial effort at that, like kind of thinking about showing that the turn could be pragmatic, right, that it could be used in classrooms, that there were, just that it was pragmatic, but it's time to do some bigger stuff with it and to kind of show that there is broad interest in the turn. It's just people might not even quite realize it. And so to start realizing that broad interest and then to really let us in much fuller ways talk about the turns, and to better and more fully and systematically and explicitly realize it.
Well, we're going to talk about the poetic turn today. We're going to use some poems to do that. Is there any, do you have a definition you can give us? Of course, the poetic turn is our podcast. It's called The Poetic Turn, and we're going to learn about the poetic turn, what that means, what is it in poetry, and we couldn't find a better person to talk about us and the reason for the naming of our podcast than Mike Theune.
Yeah,
tell us what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, my easy definition is poetic turn is a significant shift in the rhetorical and or dramatic trajectory of a poem, right? So some readers of poetry might be fairly familiar with turns in sonnets, where the turn is typically called a volta, right? And so again, and we have kind of standard ways that we talk about that in the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, the volta occurs between the first 8 lines and the final 6 lines. And then
now, Mike, we don't want to scare off our listeners now.
Sure.
Sonnets and Shakespeare
sure.
and
you bet. I love
terms
it. So,
and
yeah,
Petrarchan.
Yeah,
I'm starting to feel some heat from our listeners already.
I love it. Good.
But it's
I
so
want
clear.
to generate heat, but all the right kind of heat. So
it's so clear though. In a Shakespearean sonnet, you have those 8 lines. And that famous sonnet, and the turn line is, "But haply I think of thee," and then my soul, like to the
lark at break of day, suddenly arising. Yeah, I wish I had it memorized, right? And then, right, it's beautiful, right?
He's so down on himself. That poem, it's a very famous Shakespearean sonnet, and we might read a little bit of it on this podcast or another one, but he's really down on himself. The writer is really, I'm down, I'm despairing, and this guy's richer than me, and that guy's better looking, and man. And then I think of you.
That's right.
And now my heart leaps up, and I'm happy. And there's that very distinct turn in that famous sonnet.
And that right there is a gorgeous example. Yeah, so that is a gorgeous example of the volta in a sonnet, although right? So some people might say, right, so there's that certainly is the volta, like, so there's a tricky thing, right? So that's a sonnet. So Shakespeare, those 14-line poems, Shakespeare, of course, though, was writing sonnets a couple hundred years after some of the earliest practitioners. That included Italian poets who included the poet Petrarch. And so Shakespeare kind of converted Petrarch's rhyme scheme and structure, right, where the major split was between, so it's a 14-line poem, and that major split was between the first 8 lines and then the final 6, the octave and the sestet. Shakespeare shifted that so that there was much more 3 separate quatrains or 4-lined kind of groups of lines. And then it culminated and then the major turn is very often then into lines 13 and 14 where there's a closing couplet. But even in the poem that you're talking about, right, when in disgrace in fortune and men's eyes,
I all alone weep my outcast state.
Yeah, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries is an amazing poem. But there you got it. The major turn does happen kind of between the first 8 lines and the 6. So everybody talks about Italian versus English, but there's the English sonnet is still very much riffing off of the Italian, still using that turn, that earlier turn. And then in that particular sonnet, there's a kind of, I'd almost call it a kind of torquing up in that last 2 lines where there's not another major turn. It's just kind of like, let's be clear about what has happened here. So it kind of finishes the turn there a little bit.
And the word volta, is that Italian for jump or leap?
So it's great. It's or
Latin.
Often thought to be a kind of architectural term, that it's like a vault. And right, so you bet, of course, there's a sense of that architectural leaping. And I love that. So if you allow me some poetic license here, right, that precisely that it's both structural, right? It is a part of the structure of how lyrics work, but that it's also a structural leap. It is a point in the poem where we come to expect leaps and shifts and surprises. And I think that's what's particularly powerful about the turn and about voltas, is that it's why it's titled that book Structure and Surprise. It is structural. It's part of how so many lyric poems work. But the point of it ultimately is the delivery of these pretty amazing surprises and these shifts.
And we're going to hear that. We're going to hear that so clearly in the poem, the one poem you were considering us focusing on today. It just knocked me out when I read it, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it as well. And one of the many things that's great about the Poetic Turn, our podcast, is, I of course I've read poetry my whole life. Shakespeare, a lot of Shakespeare, of course, as an actor, but really connecting to it. And for everyday people, we have an English professor on the podcast today, but for ordinary people that are not immersed in the language and the language of poetry, our podcast is hopefully a bridge to that kind of understanding. And oddly enough, I met a guy, Evan, at the Globe Pub last night. I went to see improv at the Bughouse Theater, just a terrific improv show. Jimmy and Johnny invited their guests, Mark Chosky and Jack Bronison, and it was just a fantastic 4-person show. And went down the street to the the Globe Pub, and I'm sitting eating dinner at the bar, and a guy next to me sees me reading my phone because I was looking at the email from Mike. He says, "Hope you don't mind me asking, what are you looking at?" And so I started telling him about the Poetic Turn in poetry, and I think he's older than Evan because he's married, but it might be in his late 20s, early 30s. I'd like to get more poetry in my life. I've been thinking about that lately. I said, well, I've got a podcast for you.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we're sort of pushing, an idea that we're pushing, and maybe you can speak to this a little, Mike, if we're on the right track or not, is rather than saying, what does this mean after reading a poem, and try to get a meaning out of it, we say, first, let's look and find the turn. And where does it surprise you? Why might that be potentially better if somebody's reading a poem?
Yeah, you bet. So there's one of the great works on the turn is a chapter, the final chapter in a book by the poet John Ciardi, and it's called "How Does a Poem Mean?" And so this issue of like not what does the poem mean, right? Try to figure out, but The point is how, and in the final chapter, Ciardi talks about the fulcrum of the poem, and it is the turn. And Ciardi, at the beginning of his book, he says, hey, everybody, you have to kind of read the whole book. He says, I put the most important chapter last because everything leads up to this, but everything is based upon that chapter. And it is a chapter that is on the turn, and he essentially kind of says, like, look, this is what it is. Like, the fulcrum creates these kind of balances of opposites, and essentially what you do to kind of engage a poem is you kind of see what's happening before, you see what's happening after, you kind of assess those together, and you kind of then kind of can figure out then the significance of the meaning. But the issue is, how does the poem mean? And very often that how will involve in a very significant way the turn, which then it also encompasses all these other aspects of the poem, the form, the diction, the syntax, all of the other elements. But yeah, to kind of go like, yeah, the work isn't to kind of decipher a particular meaning. The work is to notice the dynamism of the poem and then to recognize how that offers perhaps a larger sense of kind of significance and maybe some kind of conceptual information. But it's really about the kind of ritual of the poem and entering the ritual of the poem. But the ritual largely involves and rotates around the action of turning.
Excellent. Yeah. And we should consider Ciardi. His name is spelled Ciardi. And so maybe a Ciardi poem is something that we can look into it.
Yeah, or we could just read the entire final chapter on how does a poem mean.
For a poetry turn geek like me, that was quite a discovery to find that. And if I may, this is a shout out to all teachers and mentors out there, where I had written Structure and Surprise and gave a talk about it at my alma mater, Hope College. And after that talk, a former professor of mine approached me and said, Mike, this is great. Have you heard of this book? I think that the final chapter. So it turned me onto that, and then it helped me see that one of the things that I'm talking about in the latest book project is to kind of point to that there are these pretty fascinating discussions of the turn out in the world, in addition to Structure and Surprise. It's just that what's crazy about them is that there are so many ways in which they're very singular and isolated, and nobody has yet kind of shown that, like, that John Ciardi talking about the fulcrum is very much talking about the same thing when the critic M.L. Rosenthal is talking about torque, who's talking about the same thing when Hank Laser in an essay on the poem Ray Armantrout talks about swerve, and they're talking about virtually the same thing that's being talked about when another poet critic talks about the center of a poem, right? Like, Part of the reason why we don't realize the turn as fully as we do is because there has been a non-standard nomenclature. And let me be very clear that my position is not that we need to regulate the language. I let language do its wonderful, gorgeous, strange work always. However, it's also good to take a moment and to take a beat and to say those different names largely identify precisely the same thing, because it's important at some point to realize, like, there is this overwhelming interest in this, that this isn't some idiosyncratic kind of interest that I just have. Lots of people have it, but there are all of these reasons why it kind of hasn't really bubbled up as fully as other elements of poetry.
Might not be a bad idea to give it the same name across the board, so that we kind of know what we're talking about. And so they need to buy your book when it comes out, when it's finished and comes out.
Well, I trust you guys will have me back when it comes out.
Well, and that's part of why, I mean, I was briefly a substitute teacher, a long-term sub for a 6th grade English class. And in the curriculum there, the things that they use in poetry are often things that are very tactile, that anybody can get immediately. And so rather than saying, where does this turn, where does surprise come up, which can potentially be a little bit subjective, they say, write out the rhyme scheme of this poem.
Yeah. Oof.
And, and so that's the first thing you do when you read a poem in this, if it rhymes, that they want you to do is write out the rhyme scheme. And that can be interesting to point out, but that's not going to help you enjoy a poem, in my experience. And so we hope that through us talking about all this stuff, maybe we can say, the poetic turn, the turn in poetry is something that can actually make you enjoy poetry more.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope so. I love to use the comparison of the structure of a joke to think about the structure of poetry, right? So jokes contain turns. It's the turn, you've got setup and you've got punchline, and then there's that moment between, right? That moment between the setup, right? You know this as actors, right? There's this magical, crazy amount of time between a setup and a punchline that it takes to perform the punchline well and to deliver the surprise. And so a big part of, it sounds strange to say, but actually a big part of understanding what poems are and what they do is to realize that they kind of want to deliver a certain quantity of surprise. And so a person who wants to read a poem well really needs to understand that, and then to realize, like, you've got to deliver that in such a way so that you're actually emphasizing the surprise. It's knowing about turns, knowing that it wants to deliver surprise is a crucial aspect for performing poems.
And if you, just like if you don't know how to tell a joke right, it's not
Right.
going to work. And if you don't know, it helps. I mean, you can still engage with poetry, as I have throughout my life, without really knowing the concept of the poetic turn. You can still engage with poetry, but I'm enjoying it more. I'm seeing it better. There's a clarity that comes from recognizing the turn. And terrific.
When I next go up for promotion, Darren, I need a letter from you.
I'll do that, or I'll do a recording. It'll have this
Right,
polished
perfect.
announcer voice.
I just want to sit here and listen to you guys talk with your beautiful voices. I get my high nasally thing going on, and then you guys are doing
No,
this
you sound
beautiful
great.
stuff.
In fact, you sound so great, we're going to have you read something so we can have an example of the poetic turn for our audience. That would be really lovely.
Yeah.
You want to go to Demeter's Last Stand?
Yeah, you bet. I'll read that. So just a few words about this. This is a poem by a colleague of mine here at Illinois Wesleyan University. Her name is Joanne Diaz. She is here on campus. She's the Isaac Funk Professor of English. She's an amazing colleague. I don't know how she does all the things that she does, and then she manages to write these kind of killer poems. And this is just one of them. She's written a few of my absolute favorites. So this is a poem. I have a page on the Structure and Surprise website called Voltage, where I have a collection of some of my favorite turns. And so Demeter's Last Stand is among those that just has this kind of killer turn. And so I thought that we'd kind of talk about this and some other poems like it for today, maybe. So without further ado, here is Demeter's Last Stand. Yeah.
One moment. Do you need to clear your throat, Mike? Or are you good?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
You tell me.
Yeah, no. You sound good, but it seemed like you were a little bit. So I just want to make sure. And of course, I'm going to be editing very easily. It's a very easy program to edit in. So go ahead and give the title of the poem again, and then
Sure.
we'll go into it.
You bet. Here is Demeter's Last Stand. Last night, I alluded to my years as a campfire girl, and Averill revealed that she had been one too. And after she made the sign of a fire rising from her hand, we chanted the promise that every campfire girl knows. Wohelo means work. I light the candle of work. Wohelo means health. I light the candle of health. Wohelo means love. I light the candle of love. How many times did Lori Dombrowski and I giggle during those camping expeditions in the backyard of Mrs. D'Angelo, a kind woman who seemed to have invented recycling when she filled her old knee-highs with soap chips and knotted the ends to tree branches, when she poked holes in gallon jugs and forced twigs into them so that we could start and stop the water as the jug swung unwieldy from low branches, when she told ghost stories that originated in her own house. After a few years, Mrs. D'Angelo left us for a job in Pennsylvania, and our new troupe had to meet in the low-ceiling cafeteria at the middle school, where we resigned ourselves to cutting ochre-colored felt amidst the stench of tater tots. I don't know how long it took for a janitor named Connie Rock to find us, but our encounters with him in the hallway did offer surprises. One week he'd kneel down to compliment our felt handiwork and knee socks. Another time he'd ask us to sit on his lap just for a little while. And eventually we kissed him on his sallow cheeks that were soured and lined with decades of hard drink and smoke. One night, when all the parents came to the cafeteria for an event not worth remembering, Connie found me and called my name, and I went to him as I had in the weeks before. I imagine now that my mother saw then. The red sash full of badges that she had hand-sewn, the blue hat that featured a small bright bird, my smile at an old janitor as he cradled me on his lap and smiled back, as if I were Persephone and he were Hades, just after he had pushed through a cleft in the soil to steal me. It only took a moment for my mother to seize my wrist and hurry to the car. Mother, if I thanked you too little, know that tonight I remember your besting of Demeter's speed, and that you saved me from a lifetime of winters.
Man, oh man.
Wow.
So let's give our audience just a little bit of a background of the mythology. I thought the three of us, not everybody is conversant with this myth. So let's talk about Demeter and Persephone just for a little bit.
Yeah, for me, the little bit that I know about the myth, right, is that so the abduction of Persephone, the young girl, Persephone,
daughter of Demeter,
is the daughter of Demeter. So she is stolen away, abducted by Hades, and then taken down into the underworld. And then Demeter goes after her and tries to get her back. And a deal is struck. Persephone has eaten a certain
pomegranate
amount of
seeds.
What's that? A certain
I think
amount
they're
of
pomegranate seeds.
That's right. And so has eaten 6 of them. So 6 of the months there will be, then she will have to return to Hades and live in the underworld. And then for 6 months, then she can go up and be with her mother. And then, so this is a myth that gives us the reason for why we have the seasons. And so, yeah.
And so the mother's saving her daughter from she lays it out for us. What my mother was seeing me, her innocent girl, and the daughter of this creepy guy.
Yeah.
Just what a story! It's amazing story too.
For me, there's so much happening here. I'm trying to, so I think the thing that I get really, the thing that I find so striking in this poem, and of course what's fascinating here, and I'm interested in the question of where we would even locate the turn. I actually think that there is a bit of a turn radius on this poem, right? So once we get kind of the whole poem kind of moves a certain way, it's a narrative poem, and then we get where the speaker finally reveals that there's going to be this metaphor at play, right? With Connie Rock suddenly becomes Hades, she becomes Persephone, right? And then the question is, right, now we understand who these characters are.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
it's not like a sharp thing, like in the Shakespearean poet we noted before. There's this sharp, evident.
That's right.
Haply I think of thee.
Last time we read Austin Smith's Mummy in the Freeport Art Museum, and it's
right.
clearly on that one line.
That's right. That's right.
One, how did you describe it? It's a poetic. It's a turn.
And let me give a shout out there, a person who's been very helpful in my thinking about the turn and with some of my writing projects is a person named Anne McCarthy, who's a terrific critic, and I think she's the one who suggested that to me. And once Anne did that, I was like, oh, come on, Mike. There's all sorts of wordplay around the turn. You should be employing all of it. So Anne was, the one who inspired that in me. So shout out to Anne, the incredibly smart and insightful Anne McCarthy.
About the region of the turn, like a region of turn, you mean?
Yeah, it feels like that, right? I mean, and here, or at least you can kind of, in retrospect, right? Man, there's so much to talk about with turns. Like, yeah, who knows what's going on with this poem and where it's leading? But in retrospect, right? So the mention of Hades and Persephone turn out to be really important for how this poem is going to then finally shift and culminate. But for me, what's so powerful here is that the poem is taken out of its kind of narrative mode. For the most part, we're being told this story, right? Here's a Campfire Girls story, and we moved to a middle school, and this stuff happened, and then my mother recognized something, and she acted in this way. Okay, fine, but here comes this moment where the poem, and I hope that my reading captured this, where it's just like there is a complete downshift, right, in this, and we go into a completely new gear. Phyllis Levin, in her introduction to her anthology on the tradition of the English sonnet, talks about the turn being like a key change in music.
Yeah.
And it certainly is that, but it's a change in everything. It's a change in pace, it's a change in key, it's a change in tone, or it at least can be. And this is one of those that really is where, and part of what's huge here is that we move out of the narrative mode, and it feels as though we move into this mode that I kind of want, for lack of a better term, kind of want to call the lyrical mode, where we go from the recounting of moments into this kind of this eternal present where the mother is gone now. And I know from knowing about Joanne's life that her mother had passed away. And so this is now giving kind of this eternal and forever gratitude to the mother for saving the speaker of this poem from a lifetime of pain, that if she were to have been actually abused by this man, it would have been something that would have been a part of her potentially forever, and that her mother managed to do that. But in order to convey the depth of that, the whole poem, it shifts its mode from the narrative into this
from a simple story being told to like engaging with these ancient stories, these ancient
That's right.
myths.
Yeah. Well, it blows up. It's like it explodes into a full universe of
That's
things.
right. Yeah, and I also, one of the things that I like about this, and there are a number of poems that do this, where poems shift at the end and they realize that, look, maybe I'm just kind of a bit of a narcissistic reader, but when I read a poem, I vaguely think it's being written to me, right? I take it personally. It's like, yeah, okay, there's an intimate relationship that I form with the poem. And then there's something amazing in this poem where it's like, Mike, this poem isn't for you at all. This is a poem that is for the mother and is an acknowledgement of the mother. And I have to say that in my reading of this poem, I am so honored to be displaced in such a way, because I can understand how crucial this moment was and how big it was. And so I gain something from it by better understanding and feeling the magnitude of that. And frankly, I also feel that because I feel that I've been marginalized in that in a completely proper and powerful way.
Wow.
Yeah, it does feel like that, where it starts off and you do, well, at least I felt that sort of personal, like it's just me in this poem right now. But then you do kind of get thrust to the side and you watch this thing happen that's bigger than he would have expected.
Yeah, it's a
lyric
huge
elements.
Go ahead.
Lyric elements push through a cleft in the soil. Hades, just after he had pushed through a cleft in the soil to steal me. I mean, so it goes to some completely different place.
Yeah. So I love poems that have a kind of quality that I've come to call fitting surprise. So it is surprising, but the surprise still kind of fits, it maybe grows out of what came before it. So I love the idea that the American modernist poet Wallace Stevens kind of formulates in his poem called An Ordinary Evening in New Haven. And he talks in there about the poem being the cry of its occasion, right? Kind of that the cry itself is part of the thing, part of the raise itself, like raise in medias res, right, in the middle of things. So part of the raise itself, part of the thing itself, and not about it, right? So there's a way in which too often people kind of think that the turn, so often there's this idea that poetic turns are like you go from problem to solution, right? That it's like, okay, it's going to solve it. And it can happen. But more importantly, I think, is this idea that the turn emerges in this kind of vitally connected way that's also a vital surprise from the material that it is. So it's the cry of its occasion. And in this poem, we can almost feel that cry itself. It is that the speech to the mother, the gratitude to the mother is nothing short of prayer, right? Like it is a heartfelt, emotional exclamation from one's inner self, right, to this other who did this personal and cosmic thing for her and saved her from so much harm. It's incredibly powerful. But I like how it provides us with a different sort of model for the turn. I think too often people think of turns as, when they hear it, they might go, oh, that's kind of mechanical, or problem and solution, or this. And it's like, turns happen in such a variety of ways. But for me, again, one of the most meaningful is for it to kind of be the cry of its occasion, that it emerges from what came before it, but not in a discussion format or a conversation format. It comes out as a cry, as a shocking, surprising effusion.
Yeah, well, that term "fitting surprise" I've really latched onto a lot in my reading and writing, and the idea behind it that especially I love about it is that it's not that, you end a poem that was about one thing and then say something random. You don't talk about love and then say, and pizza and hamburgers and dinosaurs, because that is surprising, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a great poem. But that fitting surprise, where it feels like it was both surprising and inevitable.
Appropriate, yeah.
Which this one has. And, it to me, this, I think, in images a lot. And the kind of turn in this poem, Demeter's Last Stand, it feels like you're on like a giant ship, and you're in a bunch of fog. And, they halfway through the poem they start turning the ship. But the ship can't turn all at once. And so it slowly creaks and creaks. And by the time it turns around, suddenly you're starting to peek through the fog, and there's something totally different up in front. Yeah. And so that's how this one feels to me, which doesn't make it feel like the turn is sloppily put together, but that it actually takes a significant amount of force and effort to bring it to this conclusion.
It's an important shift that takes some time. Yeah.
You bet. Can you try to imagine this poem. It's ludicrous to do, but as a thought experiment, to try to imagine this poem without the lines after mother, right? It is, with all due respect to everything that came before, and to all of the experience that it recounts and all, it just doesn't become a poem until it manages that fitting, surprising cry of its occasion.
Well, I love to do that sort of thought experiment of what would make this poem bad, what would make this turn bad, because you can look at it and say, like, it could have been so many things that would not have landed so well, because it could have just said, it could have ended with, "Mother, I'm going to bed now."
Right, or even just to say something to try to imagine, right, to even just to imagine it without the address, that it could say something like, right, "My mother bested Demeter's speed and saved me from a lifetime of winters," right? Like there, right, in terms of the narrative, that covers it and so much, but it requires it.
No, I'm getting chills right now just thinking about how direct it really is.
That's
because
right.
Just thinking about it the other way.
That's right.
It makes it so, it still would be good, but it doesn't hit you so hard.
Thank you, Evan. Yeah, at the heart of analysis is always the question, why this instead of this? And then when we can kind of cite examples that are close to it, but that just don't quite hit, and then we see what's there and we can feel better how that works. Like that's how we know what's working. It's how we sense that. And here it feels like that turn is masterfully crafted.
What we typically do on the Poetic Turn is we read the poem and then we talk about it and then read it again. I think, Evan, can I read it this time?
I'd love to hear you read it, because you're the one who doesn't know Professor Diaz. I've gotten to take her class.
Oh, you have?
And she's terrific. Shout out to Professor Diaz. I still call her Professor Diaz.
It's good. Yeah.
But she is terrific. I took a great Shakespeare class with her that was incredible. And she's, frankly, probably way too humble a poet, because I graduated before I knew that she had written these incredible poems.
Hearing you talk about your teacher, your colleague, and I'm reading her poem, oh my gosh, whose mind could this come out of? And she's just this human, and she buys groceries like everybody else, and oh my gosh.
If I sorry, and I look forward to hearing the poem again. First of all, Darren, you should have read this poem initially anyway.
No,
I
no.
can't wait to hear you read it. But a quick
No.
shout out, sorry, just to Joanne's amazing. If quick shout out for Illinois Wesleyan English department. Like if you're an undergraduate poet and you want an interesting undergraduate training in poetry or creative writing or literature, Illinois Wesleyan is an amazing place to be. We've got true people here who know their stuff and here I'm talking about Joanne, right? And who are terrific teachers. So find your way to us. We can do some beautiful things with poetry together.
Well, I so appreciate y'all because I was an acting major and I still found my way in.
Well, we'll put
liberal arts.
Yes.
put our link in the show notes to the Illinois Wesleyan, specifically the English department or the poetry program.
The English department.
Okay. We'll do that. We'll put that in the show notes for any people that stumble upon our podcast that are writers, that are poets, that want the best possible introduction or education on poetry, because they have people like Professor Theune and Professor Diaz there. So, well, let's hear it again, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Okay. It's a poem by Joanne Diaz called Demeter's Last Stand. Last night, I eluded you. Demeter's Last Stand. Last night, I alluded to my years as a campfire girl, and Averill revealed that she had been one too. And after she made the sign of a fire rising from her hand, we chanted the promise that every campfire girl knows. Wo-he-lo means work. I light the candle of work. Wo-he-lo means health. I light the candle of health. Wo-he-lo means love. I light the candle of love. How many times did Lori Demkowski and I giggle during those camping expeditions in the backyard of Mrs. D'Angelo, a kind woman who seemed to have invented recycling when she filled her old knee-highs with soap chips and knotted the ends to tree branches, when she poked holes in gallon jugs and forced twigs into them so that we could start and stop the water as the jug swung, unwieldy, from low branches, when she told ghost stories that originated in her own house. After a few years, Mrs. D'Angelo left us for a job in Pennsylvania, and our new troupe had to meet in the low-ceilinged cafeteria at the middle school, where we resigned ourselves to cutting ochre-colored felt amidst the stench of tater tots. I don't know how long it took for a janitor named Connie Rock to find us, but our encounters with him in the hallway did offer surprises. One week he'd kneel down to compliment our felt handiwork and knee socks. Another time he'd ask us to sit on his lap just for a little while, and eventually we kissed him on his sallow cheeks that were soured and lined with decades of hard drink and smoke. One night, when all the parents came to the cafeteria for an event not worth the remembering, Connie found me and called my name, and I went to him as I had in the weeks before. I imagine now that my mother saw then the red sash full of badges that she had hand-sewn, the blue hat that featured a small bright bird, my smile at an old janitor as he cradled me on his lap and smiled back, as if I were Persephone and he were Hades, just after he had pushed through a cleft in the soil to steal me. It took only a moment for my mother to seize my wrist and hurry to the car. Mother, if I thanked you too little, know that tonight I remember your besting of Demeter's speed, and that you saved me from a lifetime of winters.
Ooh, beautiful. Thank you for I've only ever heard that in my own brain or my own voice, so I'm really glad to have beautifully read, Darren.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and
I'm just so happy to know about Joanne Diaz and her work.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be exploring it further. Her paperback book's going to be arriving here soon. So
yeah. I think for me that time just hearing the lifetime of winter. I like too how in that final line of the poem that even the poet speaker has even now shifted the myth to kind of go, okay, the winters, the seasons, and had this terrible thing happen to me, it would have been all winter, right? I mean, like, it's such a, that's part of the shiftingness of this poem as well. That's so fascinating there.
Oh, yeah. Well, and one other thing that stood out to me, I always, for some reason, take note of whenever a word like surprises appears in a poem,
Right, yeah, I know, right?
or when
Yeah,
a word
yeah,
like turn, because you read it, you find it a lot in poems, actually,
you
words like
bet.
surprise, turn,
Yep,
shift,
yep.
swerve. And I always just note it, and I don't know. I don't know if it helps me read it or not, but it's just interesting.
You bet. So I would say, so actually on the Structure and Surprise website, there's a little sub window called the self-reflexive turn. And so one of the reasons why I refer to the poetic turn as the turn is not because I was like, yeah, this is what we should call it. It's because it's what poets call it, right? So yeah, occasionally poets might call it a shift or a swerve, but overwhelmingly poets in their poems call it turn. And there must be, right, some linguist out there who there's a reason for it, and there's probably some large number of words that rhyme with turn, and so turn there, and it's probably because it's monosyllabic, right, as opposed to fulcrum. It's right. So
Yeah.
there are probably all sorts of linguistic reasons why poets in English have chosen turn, but turn is the word that poets use when kind of in that beautiful poetic way, they love to kind of point to the cool things they're doing while they're doing it, right? It's
Yeah.
so awesome. It's like, look at me do this thing. And so I do agree there's that wild moment early in this poem, right? Where does Joanne say it? That kind of crazy thing where she says, oh, about halfway through the poem, she goes, it took, right, I don't know how long it took for a janitor named Connie Rock to find us, but our encounters with him in the hallway did offer surprises. It's
There it
like,
is.
oh, wait, what? Like, what a crazy thing to say. So, and in a weird way, right, poets are writers, so they're foreshadowing, they're doing that, right? So there's Joanne kind of doing that, but almost in a kind of like, it's a bit of a like this jokey way. So it's like it did offer surprises,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so and that's what it felt like to everybody. Those girls, it's like okay, little things, and then finally he is slowly grooming, right? He's abducting them away in that kind of slow
We see
way.
the progression. We hear about the progression.
That's
So,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So and so here comes and so we're prepared for some sort of surprise. And so right in her part of the genius of this poem is preparing us for that and then the relief to know what kind of surprise actually arrives when the mother comes charging in a way that Demeter was not able to do for her own daughter. But here we get a very different kind of story, and then that effusion of gratitude at the end that then changes everything, that changes things from narrative where one thing happens after another to then the moment that's much more lyrical where, and I hate this distinction, but I'm going to traffic in it for a little bit right here, where lyric kind of loves the lyric, the eternal present of the lyric. And what we do achieve here at the end of this, through this effusion, is this eternal gratitude, right? That is this statement of, right, where we have this speech act, where we break out of this account and it moves into this moment of effusion and gratitude that is forever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
or right, of course, it's the forever of poetry, and we know Shakespeare. Professor Diaz loves this, or the immortality topos, right, where it's like, I will make you beautiful forever by writing this sonnet about
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
Yeah.
right? So it's like, Mother, I will show my gratitude forever by revealing what I'm grateful for in this poem, but also, though, by thanking you eternally at the end of this poem.
Yeah.
It is
Forever. Yeah,
forever.
yeah.
And so it's timelessness, and it's a boss move. It's so powerful. It
Yeah.
is about power there, and it's amazing.
Well, I'm so glad you brought this to our attention, Mike, and a great poem for our podcast, a perfect illustration for us and our audience about the poetic turn with the poetic turn guy.
Hey.
And,
Poetic Turn guy.
We
yes.
look forward to your book, and we're gonna wrap things up here. But man, oh man, we hope you'll do us a favor of returning to the Poetic Turn podcast.
Yeah. And before we finish all the way,
Yeah.
could I just ask sort of a final question of, one of your great gifts is finding poems that are great. And so how might somebody at home who maybe they've just heard a couple poems that we've read, or they remember the Shakespeare that they read, how might they find some great poems in that huge sea of everything, without just going on poetry.com and being overwhelmed?
Yeah, fantastic. So look, you two have been kind to kind of help promote a little bit structure and surprise, and I mean that to be less about it being my project. Among other things, it's a really strong anthology of poems that have great turns in it. So another place where people could go is another project. It's a website called voltagepoetry.com that Kim Adonisio, terrific poet who makes terrific turns, who would be terrific for this podcast.
A great book, Ordinary Genius by her.
Ordinary Genius,
Yeah.
about poetry. So Voltage Poetry has a ton of great poems where we had like over 100 different poets who are working today picked a poem that had one of their own favorite turns in it. So we represent that poem and then they reflect on it. But the person who sprung to mind for this, if you're looking for a great poet and thinker about poetry. So first of all, so the name that leapt to mind was Jane Hirshfield. And so Jane Hirshfield is an amazing poet. A kind of new and selected poetry collection has come out called The Asking. It's a beautiful book. She's truly great. And she has these two books about poetry. So one is called Nine Gates. The other one is called 10 Windows. And 10 Windows, among other things, has an essay in it called Close Reading Windows, and Jane Hirshfield talks about the window moment in a poem, and it is a kind of turn where the poem is headed one way and then the vista of the poem just opens up into this whole other thing. Her essays on poetry are gorgeous, they are astute, and they are then in themselves these beautiful acts of anthologizing that just point you to these stunning poems. Her taste is exquisite, and so she's got great stuff. Look, and I hate to do this because then I'm kind of leaving out a whole bunch of other people. There's so
this
so
is
much
a really
beautiful
good
stuff, but
that's a good start. Jane Hirshfield.
it's a good start. Jane Hirshfield.
Hirschfield.
There's no C in it.
Oh,
It's
okay, Hirshfield.
Hirsh Field.
And you're not going to have to spell this out anyway, listeners,
Sure.
because they're going to put it in the show notes.
Love it.
Yeah. Very good, very good. Well, so exciting.
Hey, and before we do sign off, let me say as well, in a show with a poem that features gratitude, let me offer up my gratitude to you two. First of all, just for having me on. What a blast this has been. Anytime to talk about poems and the poetic turn, what a treat. But you two, you can't know how heartened I am by the fact that the turn seems to kind of mean something to you, that it offers something, and that you think that it could offer something else to other people engaging with poetry. It is just heartening, and
all we can do is name our darn podcast the Poetic Turn, Mike. We can't do any more than that.
I agree. Hey, and so anytime you need, I'll be listening. So I'm so eager for it. And if you're already talking about Austin Smith poems, you're headed in the right direction. So I love it. Thank you so much, you two, and keep me posted if I can be of service in any way.
Again, Mike, we're grateful for you to be here. I'm grateful that Evan introduced me to the Poetic Turn that he learned about from a terrific professor at Illinois Wesleyan, and we'll certainly ask you back. Any thoughts from you, Evan, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, this is just terrific. I'm going to have to re-listen to this as well, because I miss getting to talk with you so much at Illinois Wesleyan.
thanks again, and thank you, Evan. This is the Poetic Turn. If you like what we talked about, like it, share it. If you're listening, a guy I met last night, Tyler, learning about poetry and learning about the Poetic Turn, I hope you listen to future episodes. And thanks everybody so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.